Hi, I'm Chike Coleman, that's Sanford Hess, and this is Real Reviews Home Edition, the show where we talk about movies from our homes. This week, we're doing yet another director spotlight, this time spotlighting Middle Eastern film director Asghar Farhadi. Now, Sanford and I have passing familiarity with this director, um, and without going into too much of a spoilery detail about the themes that the director plays with, he likes to make the ordinary extraordinary, and he does so with taking these events that are seemingly small and quiet little pieces of information and then using it later when something big happens. Um, the first film that really executes that style of filmmaking and the processing of those themes within the story is about Elly. Now, if I'm correct, this was done in 2010, directed and written by Asghar Farhadi. Tells the story of eight people who go on a little miniature vacation. There are three children, two that are about the same age, maybe three or four, and one very small child, and the rest are adults. There is one single adult among them, and another one is brought on later named Elly. Elly is the teacher of one of the children, and she was brought on as a match for and his Azir, I think is his name.
One of the
Uh,
guys. Yeah.
Azir, Amir. I'm sorry, it was Amir. Um, as a match for Amir, as he, you know, enjoys the vacation. Elly seems quiet, withdrawn, but friendly. Um, and they have a nice night singing and dancing. And the owner of the villa in which they're staying makes jokes about, well, no, she doesn't make a joke. One of the friends says that Amir and Elly are a married couple, and there's a joke played off about that where the owner basically buys into the thought that Elly and Amir are a married couple, and they make kind of fun and jest at it. Elly seems uncomfortable, but nobody seems to notice. The next day, the children are playing by the sea, which is near the shorefront where their villa is located. And one of the smaller children swims too far, hits his head, and is unconscious in the water. Um, the daughter goes to find the responsible adults to say, "Hey, my baby brother's in the water. Somebody come help!" And what happens is they save the kid, but they're missing Elly, who was supposed to be the one watching the children. From there, the plot thickens as to where did Elly go? Did she get swallowed up by the waves? Did she not? Maybe she ran away. Maybe we should.
Right. There's some confusion about because she had talked about leaving and even talked about walking out. So there's confusion as to whether she is in the water or whether she left.
Right.
Right.
And I want you to start with what you think about this film before I say anything.
Well, okay. So what I'm going to say about this film is what happens after that. So let's do a little bit of a spoiler alert.
Spoiler
Um,
alert.
Spoiler alert. Okay, there we go. Full on spoiler alert. So, so it turns out that Ellie has drowned, which they learn definitively at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the film kind of feels like, in a way, it's over because they've had this high drama where the group of people, who don't really know who Ellie is, are having to deal with the fact that she's missing, and there's a lot of angst about that. And then it actually turns out that she did wind up drowned. So that would be sort of an ending to this movie, some closure and sort of dealing with the situation. But I thought that the movie then tacked on a very hard to watch final act in
I got
which
it.
Ellie, they use Ellie's phone to call a phone number who called her recently, and it turns out to be a guy who says he's her brother. So they make arrangements for him to come out, but it turns out that he's not the brother. He's actually her fiance. So the key thing is that Ellie is cheating on him, Even though she's engaged to this one guy and has been engaged for 3 years, she's come out to the shore to be set up with a different guy. So
Mm-hmm.
this leads to a very difficult series of final scenes where the fiance is at the beach and the whole group of people, they have to pretend that they think he's the brother, but it's just a very depressing and drawn out ending. To me, what I felt about this movie was, it does the tragedy really well. I mean, this movie has, you are on the edge of your seat waiting to see, which of these really horrible events and how it's going to turn out. But in terms of the drama aspect, I wasn't really feeling it in this movie. And I felt like the whole thing with the fiance at the end was just too long and honestly just too morose. I don't know. What did you think, Chike, about the ending?
If we're talking specifically about the ending,
Well, that
I,
last, so what did you think about the way that the movie resolved itself?
the way the movie resolved itself wasn't clean, and I know it was always going to be messy. It did this thing that I didn't think it was going to do upon further reflection, which is there's a character in this film who does a majority of the lying, and her name is Serepide. Um, and by lying, what I mean is she holds all the cards in this situation, other than Elly, because she knows that Elly is actually married. She knows that that she basically forced Elly to come on the trip in the first place. There's all these little things that slowly get unspooled because she wanted um, Amir to feel
Amir,
better
yeah.
about spending time with Elly, even though he himself also knew Elly was married. It appears
Amir?
at some point in the film. Yeah, Amir knew.
Well, he didn't know until she told him when they were going to meet the guy who said he was the brother. He didn't know
I
until
thought
then.
he knew before that.
I don't think so.
We'd have to go back and look. But the
Yeah.
point is, Seripide holds all the cards in terms of the knowledge of who Elly is as a person, even if she doesn't know last name, address. And we should point out that this movie takes place in Tehran. So there are a bunch of little cultural ideals that play into the ending that I actually kind of liked, but also kind of felt uncomfortable with. The idea of don't say that she knew that she was coming, because that will dismantle who her honor as a person.
Right.
That was an interesting idea that I liked a lot, that they didn't play enough with earlier on in the film.
Yeah, let
Um,
me say I thought also for me also that was one of my favorite parts of the movie is it's a slice of life in Iran that we don't usually get. And sort of seeing how they handled being at the beach, these were multiple couples, married couples, but the
mhm.
idea of sort of what are the sleeping arrangements, or the way that they ate their meals, sort of in a group on the floor, these are cultural things. It was an interesting slice of life. And then, like you mentioned, sort of this whole thing about the being engaged and cheating and the honor. Again, like you say, it was a very eye-opening experience to think about that they would actually make some of these decisions ultimately based on, what, we want to keep it a secret for her honor that she was even here, and how do they tell her parents and stuff like that.
Mhm. And
Another
so I
thing.
liked the film on that
Yes.
basis, even if I didn't like Serepide. I felt like she was an awful human being because you knew how worried these people were about the child that nearly drowned. You knew how dedicated they were to finding Elly, and you just held all this in. And I could almost pass that off as delayed grief, but she was given so many opportunities to say anything, any
Yeah.
detail that she had, without being forced into it, which is why one of the climactic scenes involves a male member of the group being physical with her,
Her husband. He's her husband.
her husband.
Yeah. Which I mean, I'm just clarifying that at least I mean, he is her husband. But yes, you're right. His anger at that at what she's not told people is comes out physically. So hey, so a couple of final thoughts about this one because
Okay.
then I think we have a good transition point to move on. One thing about this movie, it reminded me of a movie we saw earlier this summer, which was The Rental, in
Yeah.
which the couples go to a beach house, and the movie kind of has one tone, in the beginning where it's sort of getting off to a start, and then all of a sudden tragedy strikes, and the movie shifts entirely. And
Hmm.
I felt the same way about this one. I mean, once it pivoted in terms of that event, it was a radically different movie than the first half. Um, it wasn't as jarring of a shift as The Rental was. I mean, I'm not going to say it was kind of that forced. In this case, it's more of you knew it was coming. I mean, obviously they totally teed up the kid playing in the water. I mean, it was
Multiple times they showed it to us, and nobody
Chekhov's
paid attention
wave.
because it was like, well, it's a kid playing in the water. It
Oh,
looks
they
nice and he's cute.
You knew it. I mean, come on. That part was sort of ham-fisted, I thought. And then the other part that to me kind of fell flat on this movie was some of the comedy at the beginning. Um, just it didn't it felt, I don't know, forced. The first 20, 30 minutes of it where they're sort of joking and
Eh,
singing with each other. Yeah. Which is my segue to talk about the other movie, because I think the key thing to me to tee up the second movie is that it's the same writer director, but probably 5, 6, 7 years in between these movies, and he's had some experience in between the two.
Okay, but first, would you recommend About Ellie to our viewers?
I would recommend About Elly if you are trying to be completist for Asghar Farhadi, who makes great movies. But I would say that of so far of the ones that we've seen, this is my least favorite of his movies, and I'm including A Salesman in that, which I thought was a much better movie. And A Separation, I don't think we watched A Separation, but I also believe that's a better movie.
I would say that I would recommend it not to completists of his work, but to people who haven't seen foreign film before, because I think that's a nice little slice of life, a nice little moment in time movie that really puts you in that environment, in that culture. And you know that a movie like About Ellie could not be made in the US or in Britain. You couldn't play with those stakes the way this movie does. And that to me is why I would recommend it. Because in a normal movie, if this same scenario happens, it's just okay, we're finding the kid's found, oh, we didn't find the other person, that's okay. We're not gonna dwell on that grief, on that sorrow. We're not gonna worry about it or ask ourselves what happened because we know somebody messed up and that was it. That's how they would close the book. There was so much more detail and nuance within how this was structured, and it's why I would recommend it to people who haven't seen a foreign film before.
Right. And just, to that, it dwells into that pain. I mean, were this an American movie, they would have moved on with that and then there would be something else happening. But this movie really, you're feeling the dread of these people waiting for word, and it goes along at a relatively slow pace for those parts of the movie, but that helps. I mean, you really do feel it, like you say.
You're there in the moment with them.
Yeah.
I'll call it an exercise in guilt that everybody should experience. Now, that's in contrast to our next film, Everybody Knows, also written by Asghar Farhadi and directed by Asghar Farhadi. So, I believe, if I'm right, that this story takes place in Argentina.
Well, it takes place, I believe, in Spain, but she's home from Argentina.
Okay, takes place in Spain. The whole beginning of this movie is about this massive wedding with these family members that Laura, played by Penelope Cruz, and has not seen in years. It's kind of like a homecoming. of sorts because her younger sister is getting married. Along with Laura are her two kids, Irene, and I don't know what the other kid's name is because they never mention it.
He's a bit
Um,
player in the drama.
yeah, there's a smaller kid about the same age as the kid that drowned in the previous movie. In fact, they look a little bit alike, if I'm being honest. Um, but basically, Laura comes for her sister's wedding, and it's great because you meet the father, I think, whose name is, I believe, Armando or Antonio or something like that. Um, and the father is, would you call him retired?
Yeah, but not not on purpose. Yeah, I
Retired
mean,
by disability. Let's call
yeah,
that.
that's true. Right, right.
Retired by disability.
He's got physical
Um,
infirmities.
and, and what we learn is that Laura has a friend named Paco, and Paco owns a massive winery, which is land that her father, Laura's father, used to own. And there's a bit of strife about that. We don't learn that till later. I'm just setting up the architecture of the whole story here. So the wedding happens and everybody's fine. Irene goes off with one of the guys that she met at the wedding before the wedding happens, and then again during the wedding where he kisses her. This boy's name is Philippe. He's not nearly as important to the story as he sounds. Um, Essentially, after the wedding, there's this big party, like Godfather 1 style party, and they all dance and they all drink and they have an amazing time. And then, because Laura drinks some wine, she feels a bit out of it and goes to bed.
Irene,
Um,
because Irene feels
what?
the daughter goes to bed. Irene.
Yeah, the daughter,
Yeah,
Irene, goes to bed.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and then at some point, when I guess Laura wants to use the bathroom, she goes upstairs, finds it locked, and then gets Paco, who's attending the wedding, to force the door. And they find out that Irene is gone and is missing. From that, we then transition to the mother being sick with worry. And I should say, did I say that Paco was played by Javier Bardem? Because
You didn't
Paco was
mention
played by
it, but it's
Javier
true.
Bardem.
It's true. He's
Um, so they go out into the night and they start searching for Laura. Then they get a threatening text message that says, if you got, we have your daughter. It's gonna be bad for her if you don't, you know, do what we
don't
say.
tell the police. They say don't tell the police or we'll kill her.
Yeah, they say, yeah, don't tell the police or we'll kill her. Um, and then, it's a process of, well, who has her? Well, they look at wedding video footage of the wedding. Laura's husband was not able to attend the wedding because of reasons we do not know until later, but it involves him being not chosen for a job because apparently he was an alcoholic 16 years previous. Um, And so then they work with this retired police detective who's basically giving them advice about how to get Irene back. Laura's completely distraught all the time because they got a text message from the kidnappers that said, "Give us 500,000 pesos." And another person also got the text message. And the other person that got the text message was Paco's wife, B. And we don't know why that is yet. They go on to explain why that is, though, and explain that Paco is actually Irene's biological father. And that's a secret that is not really a secret at all because apparently the whole town knows.
Everybody knows.
Everyone knows. Um, and so then it becomes this whole idea of how do we get Irene back? There's little things that were shown to us throughout the film we didn't bother paying attention to. Like the fact that Irene has asthma, or at least breathing problems. And then a text message later comes in like, "You've got to give us the money. She's having difficulty breathing. If you don't give us the money, she will die." Um, and from there, things go in a pretty stupid direction, might I add.
Hmm. Which part is that?
The part where they figure out who actually, well, The part where it's revealed who actually has Irene.
Now, why do you think that's stupid?
I don't know. It just feels. Let me backtrack a bit. I don't like this movie. I don't
Okay,
like this movie
let's
at all
start
because
there.
here's the thing. If you're gonna give me another movie in the same style as About Elly, you gotta give me characters that I'm drawn in by. I for About Elly, yeah, I'd never seen these people before, and that was and being thrown into them driving to this villa was going to be a big great thing. But you spend time around these people, getting these little comedic moments that make us like them or make us at least find them interesting, even if we can't figure out all the names. Then when the drama hits, you start learning names because you're like, wait, maybe one of them actually does know something. In
Right.
this one, there's so many characters that are woven throughout this tale that it almost makes sense not to care rather than to try to. Um, Penelope Cruz is great as a grieving mom. Javier Bardem, who is actually her partner in real life, is great as Paco and brings a pathos to the role you wouldn't expect of somebody who used to be somebody else's lover. But I don't care about anybody else in this damn movie. There's nobody remotely likable in this movie. They're all being selfish about land that none of them really has, or they all have. It's not really made clear because they keep changing the owner or the true authoritarian of the land that they're all fighting over, and it makes no freaking sense. This movie is messy to the hill. It's well directed. I'm not going to say it's not well directed. It's supremely well directed. Um, but the thing I guess I like about Asghar Farhadi films is that they're minimalist. They do so much with so little. And in this one, you put us in a giant, thriving village with so many people who have the ability to talk behind the back of the family, who have the ability to be deceitful to the family. So now, as you're watching, you're just literally saying, well, shoot, the cop probably knows where Irene is because he's being shifty about the information he delves out. And he's getting more and more into Laura's personal life as this goes on. You've got the woman who was just married, kind of trying to be supportive, but not really knowing what to say. You've got everybody playing the blame game about the fact that Laura supposedly gave Paco this winery land ages ago for a cheap price when she shouldn't have. It's a giant blame game that really goes nowhere except to eventually give us the conclusion of we hope Irene's alive because this family is freaking nuts. I'm sorry. Sanford, what do you have to say?
Well, I liked the movie more than you did. I felt like, I mean, like you, I noticed that it was very similar in ways to About Ellie. I mean, especially in the fact that we have, the sort of somewhat tragic event happens, although soon it happens faster and everybody knows.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have this period of grieving and pathos that you mentioned. And I got to say, I thought Penelope Cruz was excellent at that phase because, I mean, yeah, we can buy her as, this lovely woman, coming home and being happy with her family, but I bought her more as this grieving mother. I mean, I bought that. And while we're doling out good performances, I thought the guy who played her husband was really good.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, I just thought that I believed the way that they were dealing with the situation. It felt somewhat natural to me. It felt like yes, I could see people behaving like that in this kind of situation. Now, like the first film, also, there's a lot of, so there's this period in the middle where you're kind of like, okay, how's this going to resolve itself? Is she going to live? Is she going to die? Are they going to find her? Are they not going to find her? It kind of goes back and forth, just like, about Ellie. But in this one, I feel like I didn't think that the plot was stupid. And I thought that it actually made more sense. I mean, they came up with what is a somewhat legitimate, story around why she would have been kidnapped and who would have kidnapped her. which I'm not gonna. We don't need to get into. But
Yeah.
when you find out that part, I was kind of like, oh, okay, and it did feel a little bit. I mean, that retired detective, it kind of did feel a little bit like the amateur sleuth kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I just thought that they kind of, as a director and as a storyteller, he did a good job kind of keeping you in suspense for a long time, and yet resolving it in a somewhat meaningful way. So, but I also, I mean, again, to me, it felt like he was kind of, to a certain extent, redoing his earlier movie, but with a much more expensive production budget, with stars. And you're right, you don't feel about these characters the same way. But that's one of the things about using these famous actors, is that you don't need to have a lot of backstory with Javier Bardem, because your mind fills that in for you. It's like, oh, it's Javier Bardem, okay, he must be kind of a, and then you project whatever your mental image of it onto the character. So it's just a different kind of movie, and it's interesting to see what he's done with the production budget. Now, it was even more fascinating to me because here you have an Iranian filmmaker making a film in Spanish,
Yeah.
which isn't really for an American audience, but probably was made with an eye towards an American audience.
Mm-hmm.
But held up well. So I liked this movie more than you did. I liked it more than About Elly, and I would recommend it to people over About Elly myself.
Ooh.
If you have somebody who's coming cold to the situation, because I think it's a more approachable and sort of professional film.
It may be a more approachable entry point, but the that's what it is for me. The cultural significance is not there.
You're right.
The
Absolutely.
stakes that you would have within everybody knows, beyond her just being asthmatic, beyond you know all this extended family fighting over land. You know, I don't know what you could have done story wise to really give us an angle that we weren't expecting. Maybe that she found out that she was in love with Felipe and that they orchestrated it together, but they had
But
been talking long before they
yeah.
arrived at the actual
But
before she
see,
arrived at on to go on the trip in the first. Something that would just make it go, oh, you know what? Irene was aware of the fact that her parentage isn't what her parentage is. That would be an excellent twist to play within that movie to make me go, oh snap!
yeah.
Like I didn't see that coming. But she didn't orchestrate it herself. She just knew, and her knowledge and playing against that knowledge, like let's say instead of the nice free spirited teenager was, let's just say she was bitter towards her mother within the last 2 to 3 months, and that Laura was picking up on that. If you add that extra dimension into the film, it colors it so much more. But for the fact that we don't have that piece of plot thread, for the fact that all these villagers just feel like villagers in a village that want to spread gossip and fight over this land, it feels unimportant. It feels like it has no true weight. The only weight is the possible loss of Irene. And we know that we're supposed to like her because we're given little bits of scenes where we can like her, where we're shown how adventurous and friendly she is.
So
But
we gotta. I'm just keeping an eye on the time for our viewer audience. So ultimately, you do not recommend this film.
no, because I don't feel like it has the level of depth that About Elly does. And if you like depth, go with About Elly. If you want family drama, go with Everybody Knows. You're not going to lose either way because they're both masterfully directed. And we haven't really talked about that, so I'm going to briefly say this. How the director holds on shots within About Elly and Everybody Knows, especially when in conversation with the different main characters that put the story together, gives all the palpable tension you would need. You don't need to hear random sounds, random gunshots. You just need those characters to tell you how they're feeling, what they're feeling. And the lack of music that occurs throughout the film, both of them actually, really helps necessitate that fear and palpable uneasiness that comes with the films he creates. I think he's a masterful director that doesn't get enough credit within either his home country or the U.S. Do you have any closing thoughts, Sanford?
Nope.
Okay. With that said, we're going to veer away from director spotlights for a bit and go into some other interesting territory in our next episode. And you'll find out what that is on our next episode. This has been Real Reviews Home Edition. I'm Chike Coleman. That's Sanford Hess. We will see you guys next week. Bye, guys.